The dust of Babylon tasted of baked clay and regret. I knew the taste well. For 2 moons I had stood before the processional way, my sandals grinding grit into the earth, my eyes fixed on the towering Ishtar gate. Its brilliant blue glazed bricks, adorned with dragons and young bulls, were meant to inspire awe in the might of the gods and the king. To me, they were the glittering teeth of a monster that had swallowed my brother whole. His name was Nabu, not after the god of wisdom, but after my grandfather, a man who could read the liver of a sheep and the heart of a man with equal clarity. My brother could do neither. His heart was as open as the summer sky, and his wisdom was that of the reeds by the Euphrates. He bent with the current, trusting it would carry him somewhere good. It had carried him here, into the maw of the great ziggurat, Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, and it had not let him go. He was chosen, that was the word they used, chosen, a word that tasted like honey and ash in my mother's mouth. An honor, my father had said, his voice hollow as a drum. An honor to be selected at 15 years of age, pure and untouched, to serve the priests of Marduk. They said he would learn the sacred scripts, the movements of the stars, the chants that kept the world in balance. They said he was beautiful and devout, and that Marduk had looked upon him with favor. I had seen him only once since he was taken. It was a fleeting glimpse during a procession. He was draped in white linen, his dark hair gleaming with scented oil. He walked among other chosen boys, all with the same serene, placid expressions. But when his eyes, the same eyes that used to sparkle with mischief when we'd steal figs from the market, swept over the crowd, they passed over me, his own brother, without a flicker of recognition. It wasn't disdain, it wasn't forgetfulness, it was nothing, a void. His eyes, once vibrant pools of life, were like polished river stones, smooth and empty. That was the moment the fear, a cold serpent, coiled itself in my gut. Every day since, I had come to the gates, begging the guards, men whose faces were as hard as the kiln-fired bricks they stood upon. I am Kyle, son of Ashur, the stonemason. Nabu is my brother, I just want to know that he is well. The answer was always the same, a shove, a sneer. The chosen belong to Marduk now, they have no family but the god. Today was different. Today the serpent in my belly was thrashing. A rumor had slithered through the market, a whispered word from a frightened acolyte who had fled in the night. He spoke of rituals in the ziggurat's heart, of boys who slowly forgot their own names, of chants that did not praise the gods but scoured the soul clean, leaving a perfect empty vessel. He spoke of the ultimate offering, not a life but a mind, a consciousness given over so the priests could claim to speak with the pure voice of the divine, untainted by memory or love. The most horrifying act wasn't one of violence, but of erasure. They weren't killing the boys, they were unmaking them. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled my bones, that I could not stand by and let them unmake Nabu. The monster had to be faced. The breaking point did not come from a rumor, but from my own father, Ashur, the stonemason, a man whose hands were his life, hands that could coax poetry from limestone, that could read the grain of a block of granite like a scribe reads a tablet. He was a man of substance, of weight. He did not believe in phantoms or whispers. He believed in what he could touch. The priests, for all their power, respected his craft, and so they had summoned him. A crack had appeared in the alabaster facing of an inner chamber of the ziggurat, a flaw near the Holy of Holies. Only Ashur had the skill to mend it without offending the gods. He was gone for 3 days. My mother and I kept a vigil. The silence in our small house, thick and heavy, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of her weaving loom. When he returned, it was not the man who had left. The dust of the sacred temple was on his clothes, but the dust of something far older and more terrible was in his eyes. He stumbled through the doorway, his face the color of wet ash. His hands, his strong, steady hands were trembling so violently he could not unlatch his own tool pouch. My mother rushed to him, her questions a frantic flutter of wings. "Ashur, what is it? What did you see?" He pushed past her, sinking onto a stool at our small table. He stared at the clay wall, but his gaze was turned inward, looking at a memory I could not fathom. He did not speak for a long time. I brought him water. He did not drink. Finally, he looked at me, and the strength that had always been my anchor, the bedrock of my world, was gone. He was a ruin. "I saw him," he rasped, his voice a dry, scratching sound. "I saw Nabu." Hope, foolish and bright, flared in my chest. "Was he well? Did you speak to him?" My father let out a sound, a terrible guttural sob that was ripped from the depths of his soul. He covered his face with his trembling hands. "They brought him with 2 other boys. They were carrying offerings for the priests while I worked. Shum-ukin, the high priest, he was there. He smiled at me. 'See, stonemason, your son thrives in the house of Marduk.' He took a ragged breath. I called his name. 'Kale,' I said. 'Nabu, my son.' He turned his head. He looked at me. My father's voice broke. He lowered his hands, and his face was a mask of utter desolation. There was nothing there. His face was smooth, peaceful, but his eyes, Anu, forgive me, his eyes were like the windows of a house where everyone has died. The lights are out. The hearth is cold. The hearth is cold.
He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a raw, desperate whisper that was meant for me alone. Shamukin put a hand on his shoulder. He said to Nabu, "Do you know this man? And your brother, Kale?" Your brother looked at my face, the face that has watched him since his first breath, and he said, "He is the mason, my lord. He is here to mend the stone. Not father, not Ashur, the mason." Tears streamed down my father's face, carving clean paths through the grime. "That is not your brother in there," he choked out, grabbing my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "That is not my son. It is a shell, a puppet carved from his flesh. They hollowed him out, Kale. They scooped him out like a melon and left only the rind. Whatever they are doing in that place, it is not the work of gods. It is the work of monsters." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, transferring the weight of his despair onto my shoulders. They are devouring his soul. In that moment, the serpent of fear in my gut stopped thrashing and struck. The question was no longer if I should act, but how. My father's words were my call to action, a clarion call of grief and horror. I would not let them have him. I would go into the monster's belly. I would find what was left of my brother, and I would drag him out, or I would die alongside him in the darkness. Before the blue glazed bricks of the Ishtar Beat became the symbol of our family's sorrow, they were a landmark of our joy. I remember walking with Nabu beneath them when he was barely tall enough to see over the market stalls. He would point up at the golden dragons, his small hand sticky with date syrup, and ask me if they were real. "Of course they are," I'd say, playing along. "They sleep during the day and fly over Babylon at night, eating the nightmares of little boys." He'd look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and delight. "Do they eat your nightmares too, Kale?" I'd boast, puffing out my chest. "I'm too tough for them." Our life was woven from such simple threads. We lived in a modest house of sun-dried brick in the shadow of the great city walls. My father, Ashur, was a man of quiet pride. His work was his prayer, each chisel strike a testament to order and beauty. My mother, Ishtarla, was the heart of our home, her hands always busy, grinding grain, spinning wool, or tending to the small herb garden that fought for life in our dusty courtyard. She smelled of saffron and wood smoke. Nabu was the dreamer. Where I saw stone, he saw sleeping giants. Where I saw stars, he saw the script of the gods. He would spend hours sketching in the wet clay by the riverbank, not pictures of warriors or kings, but of the wind moving through the reeds, of the patterns on a dragonfly's wing. He was gentle to a fault. He'd cry if I accidentally stepped on an ant. He felt everything so deeply, the world seemed to press in on him from all sides. Our bond was forged in the heat of the Babylonian sun. I was his protector, the solid earth to his wandering spirit. I taught him how to skip flat stones across the canal so they'd jump 5, 6, 7 times before sinking. He, in turn, would show me the constellations, tracing the shapes of the scorpion and the goatfish with a slender finger, telling me the stories the priests told them about them. I didn't care for the stories, but I loved the way his face lit up as he told them. The day the priests came was like any other. The air was thick with heat, and the sky was a pitiless white glare. We heard the chanting first, a low, sonorous hum that vibrated in your bones. Then we saw them, a procession of men in bleached linen robes, their faces impassive, their eyes scanning the crowds of children playing in the street. My mother's hand went to the amulet at her throat. A knot of unease tightened in the neighborhood. The choosing was a rare event and a terrifying honor.
The night of the new moon was the darkest. Clad in black cloth that smelled of my mother's tears, I slipped through the sleeping city. The ziggurat loomed over me, a block of absolute darkness against a sky pricked with cold, indifferent stars. Fear was a physical thing, a cold stone in my stomach. But the image of my father's broken face, the memory of Nabu's empty eyes, that was a fire that burned hotter than the fear. Finding the cellar entrance was the first test. It was hidden beneath a pile of discarded offering baskets behind the kitchens. The air that puffed out as I heaved the stone slab aside smelled of damp earth and something else, something cloyingly sweet and medicinal, the smell of the temple's heart. I lowered myself into the blackness, pulling the slab back into place. I was in the monster's gut. The journey upwards through the shaft was a nightmare of scraped knuckles and burning muscles. The space was barely wider than my shoulders, claustrophobic and slick with damp. The sweet herbal smell was stronger here, seeping through the porous brickwork. It made my head spin, my thoughts feel slow and sticky. I understood now. It wasn't just chanting that scoured the mind, it was the very air they breathed, a constant, gentle poison to blur the edges of the self. After what felt like an eternity, my probing fingers found the plaster. It was just as my father had described. Tapping gently with the mallet, I broke the seal and pushed the section of the frieze outwards. I peered through the gap. I was in a long, narrow dormitory, lit by a few flickering oil lamps. Rows of simple pallets lined the walls. On each pallet lay a boy in a white tunic, sleeping. The air was thick with the scent of lotus and something I couldn't name, a scent that promised dreamless, unnerving peace. My eyes scanned the sleeping forms, and then I saw him. He was on a pallet near the far wall, his face turned towards the lamp. Even in sleep, his expression was serene, placid, undisturbed. He looked healthy, cared for, and utterly, terrifyingly alien. This was the shell my father had described. I slipped into the room, my bare feet silent on the cool stone floor. I crept to his side and knelt. "Nabu," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Nabu, it's me. It's Kale." His eyes fluttered open, but there was no recognition, no surprise, just a calm, questioning gaze. It was like waking a statue. "You should not be here," he said,
his voice a soft, melodic monotone. It was his voice, but it held none of his music. This is a sacred place, a place of peace. "Nabu, we have to go. Father sent me. Mother is waiting." I grabbed his arm. His skin was cool. He pulled away, not with strength, but with a detached sort of firmness. "I have no father but Marduk. I have no mother but the temple. My name is not Nabu. My name is Vessel." The words struck me like a physical blow. Vessel, an empty cup waiting to be filled. They had done it. They had hollowed him out. Panic seized me. I couldn't reason with him. I couldn't appeal to a memory that was no longer there. "Forgive me," I whispered, and I grabbed him. He didn't fight, not really. He was limp, confused, as I hauled him from the pallet. A small cry of surprise escaped his lips, not of fear, but of disruption, like a priest whose ritual had been interrupted. One of the other boys stirred. A guard's voice called out from the hallway. There was no more time for stealth. I half-dragged, half-carried Nabu's pliant body towards the opening in the wall. He stumbled along, murmuring about peace and the great Lord Marduk. He was heavy, a dead weight of indoctrination. Behind us, shouts erupted. The temple was waking up. I shoved him through the opening into the shaft and scrambled in after him, pulling the plaster frieze back into place just as the dormitory door burst open. I had my brother, but the boy I was dragging down into the suffocating darkness was a stranger. The escape from Babylon was a blur of terror and aching grief. Descending the shaft was harder than climbing it, with Nabu's limp form an awkward, uncooperative burden. He didn't struggle, but he didn't help, his body a sack of disconnected limbs. The sweet, cloying air seemed to cling to him, a perfume I knew I would smell in my nightmares for the rest of my life. When we finally tumbled out into the cellar, covered in grime and scratches, he simply stood there, blinking in the near-total darkness, waiting for a command. We fled through the city's underbelly, a maze of stinking alleys and forgotten canals. The shouts of the temple guards echoed from the main thoroughfares behind us. Every dog's bark, every shuttered window that creaked open sent a spike of pure adrenaline through my heart. Nabu followed me without question, his bare feet slapping softly on the filth-strewn ground. It was like leading a ghost in my brother's skin. We reached the western gate just before the false dawn. My father, true to his word, had been there. A heavy purse of silver left with a sleepy, easily bribed guard got us past the gate without a second glance. We were out. The great walls of Babylon were behind us, but we were not free.
For days we walked west, towards the setting sun, away from the lands of Ashur and Marduk. I kept us off the main roads, sticking to goat tracks and dried riverbeds. The first few days were the worst. Nabu was lost in a fog. He wouldn't eat unless I put the food directly into his mouth. He wouldn't speak unless spoken to, and his answers were fragments of temple chants. In stillness, we find purpose. In emptiness, we find Marduk. At night, he would sit and stare at the moon with those vacant, polished stone eyes, and I would sit beside him, my heart a cold, heavy knot in my chest. I had his body, but his soul was still captive in that ziggurat. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I done the right thing, dragging him from his peace into this harsh, fugitive reality? On the fourth day, he began to tremble. At first, it was a fine tremor in his hands, but by evening, his whole body was shaking with violent spasms. He collapsed, feverish and delirious, his teeth chattering. The poisons were leaving his body. He cried out in his sleep, not in the melodic monotone of the temple, but in a raw, terrified voice I hadn't heard since he was a small child scared of thunderstorms. He called for our mother. He called for me. I held him through the night,
wiping his sweat-soaked brow with a damp rag, murmuring the same reassurances I had when we were boys. "I'm here, Nabu. Kale is here. You're safe." For the first time in a long time, I prayed. Not to Marduk or any of the great gods of the city, but to the small, nameless spirits of the hearth and the river, to the memory of my grandfather, to anything that might listen. I prayed for his mind to find its way home. The fever broke with the dawn. He woke, his eyes clear for the first time since he was chosen. They were filled with a profound, soul-deep confusion. He looked at his own hands, at the tattered rags I'd clothed him in, at the unfamiliar, barren landscape around us. "Kale," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Where are we? I was in the temple. I was learning the chants." He frowned, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "It was peaceful." "They were hurting you, Nabu," I said gently, my heart aching with a fragile hope. "They were taking you away from us, from yourself." He shook his head, a tear tracing a path through the dirt on his cheek. "But it was an honor. I was serving the god." The conflict tore at him, the conditioned bliss fighting against the encroaching reality. He didn't remember the specifics, only the feeling, the seductive peace of unbeing. He remembered his love for his god, but not the price he was paying for it. The journey back to himself was slow and painful. It came in fragments. One afternoon, as we rested by a small oasis, I took out the little clay nightjar whistle. Without thinking, I put it to my lips and blew. The simple, three-note call echoed in the still air. Nabu, who had been staring into the water, flinched. His head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time, I saw him. The real him, the dreamer, the artist, my brother. "The field behind the granary. You fell from the sycamore tree. You were hiding from father because you broke his favorite chisel. You whistled for me to bring you water." Tears streamed down my face. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. He reached out and touched the whistle in my hand. "I remember," he said, and the words were the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. "Kale, I remember." It was not a complete victory. The nights were still hard. He would wake up screaming from nightmares he couldn't describe, the echoes of the temple's erasure still haunting the edges of his mind. The serenity they had drugged him with had been replaced by a deep, hollow trauma. He had been a vessel, and now that he was no longer empty, he had to live with the memory of that violation. We never went back. We were exiles, our names likely struck from every record in Babylon. Our parents left to mourn 2 sons instead of 1. We drifted west, taking odd jobs, living on the fringes. I taught him what I knew of stone, and he taught me to see the beauty in the world again. His hands, once devoted to the gods, found their purpose in carving small wooden animals for children in the villages we passed through. One evening, years later, we stood on a hill overlooking a new city, a place where no one knew our names. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked quietly. "The peace?" Nabu was silent for a long moment, watching the sky. "Sometimes," he admitted, his voice steady. "It's easier to be an empty cup than a broken one, but an empty cup can't feel the sun on its face. It can't love. It can't remember." He turned to me, a sad, grateful smile on his face. "You didn't just save my life, Kyle. You gave it back to me. The broken pieces are mine, at least." I put my arm around his shoulders, and we stood together, 2 brothers against the vastness of the world.
I had gone into the monster's belly not to slay it, but to steal back a single precious soul. And in the quiet warmth of his presence beside me, I knew my redemption was not in the victory, but in the attempt. We were broken, yes, but we were whole.